The former palace of Attila. The new federal emperor Alik speaks in Hun. I am sure you will serve our common empire with the same ardor, courage, and success as under my father's banners. I leave for the east to contribute to the normalization of the situation in the steppes between the Altai Mountains and the Aral Sea. The situation is destabilized seriously after the death of the Tabgach emperor and my father. We are obliged to temporarily suspend operations against the Roman empires. He turns to Orestes and Ardaric, seated on both sides of Geazim, 8 years old. This city, capital of the young Balkan king Geazim and one of my capitals, will remain under the protection of the army of King Ardaric because I am obliged to lead with all the guard. King Ardaric bows respectfully before the emperor. I ask permission to occupy the imperial palace during your absence. Alik answers, his voice displeased, this palace must be inhabited by the Balkan king Geazim and his mother, your sister. There is also my palace when I shall be here again after the pacification of the eastern steppes. I authorize you to live with your nephew during my absence. Do not forget that it is Orestes who is the official assistant of Geazim for all Balkan affairs while you are only a king of the Gepids. Ardaric feels humiliated by his words. He knew little about Alik, who was for him only the king of the eastern Huns. Roman diplomacy skillfully exploits his wounded self-esteem. Besides, all the Germanic kings and the Hun princes remaining on the Danube are filled with gifts by the official ambassadors and agents disguised as merchants or recruited from the barbarian population of the Roman empires. One of the ambassadors speaks to Orestes. I know Attila wanted the Pax Hunna Romana, but I do not think the new Hun Emperor Alik shares the same ideas. Why? Attila lived in his youth for quite a long time in Italy. He had a very well education while Alik has a very traditional mentality and, in my opinion, he loses interest in European affairs. Orestes looks attentively at his interlocutor and says, it is true that the new emperor has not yet succeeded in consolidating the Hunnic population in the east, which has not benefited very much from the policy of Attila like the European Huns, the main suppliers of the mercenaries in the service of the Romans. The Asian Huns are constantly invited by the Georgians to participate in their invasions in China. The Huns of Central Asia also invited to participate in their invasions in Persia and India. I know that Roman diplomacy encourages the Huns to turn their attention to the east. The ambassador exclaims, why not? It is said that the Asian Huns did not much like European expeditions in wooded and often mountainous countries, in the countries ruined by the barbarian invasions and the economic crisis. It is obvious that we are trying to direct their aggressiveness against other empires. This same ambassador speaks to Ardaric. I see that now even Orestes no longer believes much in the Pax Hunna Romana. What shocks me is that this term minimizes the role of the Germanic peoples who play an increasingly important role in both the Roman empires as the federates. It is the union between the Romans and the Germanic peoples which will guarantee peace in Europe. The eyes of the king of the Gepids are inflamed. The kingdom of the Gepids is the most powerful Germanic kingdom. Certainly, but you still depend on the Huns who despise you. They despise all the sedentary people from the top of their horses. But we will have more power in the Balkan kingdom of my nephew. The ambassador speaks in a persuasive voice. But why should your nephew's kingdom depend on the Eastern Huns who are no longer interested in European affairs? While the Roman emperors offer you their friendship and are ready to help you defend your freedom, I am bound by the oath of fidelity to the Emperor Alik. But all the Huns have lent him the oath of fidelity, and now many of them do not obey him. Ardaric nods his head negatively. That's not quite right. Several tribes were represented at the wedding and funeral of Attila by the leaders of their military detachments gathered here to continue the war with the Western Empire. Almost all the principal chiefs of the eastern tribes have been retained in the east by the Georgians' threat and by operations against the Persians. He stops and then says in a relieved voice, "But it is true that some Huns princes do not respect their oath, nor the will of Attila. They consider that God has not yet given the signs of his benevolence to Elik." Wanger's objects. He has never been interested in Greco-Roman education and has almost forgotten all my lessons. Not only is he suspicious of the Germanic chiefs, but he also suspects us. He does not pay attention to my advice. I, who have served Attila all my life, for more than 40 years, I am very disappointed. Perhaps I will leave him to lead a private life and finish my life quietly by taking care of the education of my grandchildren. I am tired. In addition, my family obviously does not want to leave this city so different from the capital of Elik. Struck by these remarks, Orestes and Edecon look at each other. Finally Orestes sighs and says sadly, "Ardaric takes me away from state affairs. Traditionally charged with relations with the Romans, I see the Roman ambassadors spend more time with him because I do not have many armed forces." The capital quickly lost its luster after the death of Attila. Many of the carpets and other artifacts were taken by Elik to his main capital. No delegation comes from the east and the Caucasus. Neither the Slavs nor the Uyghurs no longer visit this town. The few Germanic chiefs who still come do not see me. Decidedly, Attila was a very great emperor, genial leader of the people. Elik did not understand his political project, his immense dream. Wanger's adds, Dengizik and Emzar did not understand it, either. All three are occupied by the division of the steppes, the cattle, and the vassal peoples. Practically the steppes are divided into several increasingly independent kingdoms with blurred boundaries. Elik is in great embarrassment. In this situation the Western advisors are not well seen. Ardaric declined Elik's invitation to come to see him in his capital and send hostages to guarantee his obedience. The Skyers, the Heruls, the Ruges, and the Sarmatians, who now mistrust the Huns, imitate the Gepids. Their armies assembled under the flags of Ardaric, reinforced by the Roman mercenaries originating from these peoples. The Huns of the Danube are divided. Some tribes declare themselves faithful to Gearsum. Ardaric retains as hostages of honor several noble inhabitants of the former capital city, which neutralizes a large part of the other remaining Hun tribes on the banks of the Danube. Elik arrives in the summer of 454 with his army, not numerous enough, and finds the insurgents united on the banks of the river Nedao. Furious, he gives the order to attack the insurgents, but his cavalry cannot break the squares, well protected by shields and long spears. In addition to the Germans struggle the Huns of Gearsum, whose shots decimate the ranks of the attackers. But full of contempt for these vassals and traitors, Elik again throws his warriors into a murderous attack, for he must win this battle at any price to prove to all the subjects of his father's empire that he is supported by God. He is also afraid that the cavalry of the Roman mercenaries will come to the rescue of the insurgents. When his horsemen retreated again with considerable losses, he left his command post and left at the head of his army in a third attack. The rage of the Huns, encouraged by the example of their emperor, begins to shake the squares of the insurgents when Elik falls pierced by a javelin. The Huns recoil by taking the corpse of their emperor. Encouraged, the allies are on the offensive. Dengizik, Elik's younger brother, takes command of the army and orders the retreat with a detour through the ancient capital, which is plundered and burnt. But Giazim and his mother were evacuated to the mountains by Ardaric, who foresaw this attack.